would be needed. Well, we all have bias. It's here. And when I tried to compress it into the time, it blew. And so this will be the bare bones, and I have asked the physicians in the audience to uh, share their experiences as I give an outline as to biases. What are biases? A bias is a slant. I mean, that's what bias means. It's a slant. It can be towards something, it can be against something. A bias is a prejudice. A bias is a stereotype. A bias is definitely a heuristic shortcut. A bias is a cognitive error. And the cognitive error is you're substituting a pattern for a for deductive reasoning. That's that's the cognitive error. And I was thinking of Mr. Spock in Star Trek. Um, he rarely let biases interfere with anything that he was any actions he was taking. Biases are common to all of us. There have been 100 biases uh, described so far, and I'm sure there are many more. Biases, biases are formed by what we are taught and our own personal experiences. It is said that by age 3 or 4, a child will recognize that some people look different from their parents and other people. And when they go to ask people why that is, that starts the ball rolling. So I'll bring up a story about my daughter. My daughter enlisted in the Army, Navy, sorry. Go Navy. Yeah, thank you. My daughter enlisted in the Navy about 6 months before she graduated from high school. And if you've had a kid do that, you know that between that point and when they get on the bus, they have these weekly meetings with their recruiter, and they are taught Navy traditions and whatever. And one time she came back from one of those, and she said, "You know, my recruiter said that when I get to basic training, I should watch out for guys from well, we do a strength. They're not. It's not the. And in the Navy, you they collect. year medical student, and when they come through for their exercise, early in the year, I ask them, where are you from and what college did you go to? And I asked one, and I said, where are you from? And she said, Philadelphia. This is great neighborhood. It's northwest of. And I said, where did you go to college? And she said, the University of Michigan. And I said, "Oh." And she said, what did you think I would say? Something like Temple or Drexel? And I said, yeah, where I went to school. The situation was that the thing that separated us was mostly two generations. I'm two generations away from the medical students we have today. And did I mention the fact that she was Puerto Rican? And the answer is no, I didn't, because it's not relevant to the story. We've all heard stories start out with somebody saying, there was this Mexican guy, and you look back on the story and you wonder of what relevance was the fact that he was of Mexican heritage relevant to the story. And most of the time, it is not relevant at all. And that is a bias. How a bias is helpful. They may be helpful in two ways. The first one, information of my daughter, Sarah, was that biases keep us safe. We have a natural fear of strangers. We have a natural fear of strangers who don't look like us, no matter what color we are. And we are wary of or biased to people who are not acting in a way we expect them. That is one way biases are. Biases are more helpful in that they save time because we all recognize patterns and it's quick and stereotypes have been shown to be valid 80% of the time. And who's going to give up those odds? I would take those odds to Vegas anytime. The problem is that when you apply them to seeing your patients, you get wrong. You have the potential to be wrong 20%. So the difference between implicit and explicit, as you all probably know already, is that an explicit bias is something that just jumps out on you at you, and you know right away what they think. So I'll give you uh, an illustration of the difference between explicit and implicit biases. I have a mixed race daughter. And when we were stationed at Fort Bragg, which is in North Carolina, I gotta tell you this. Okay. What is the current name of Fort Bragg? Can anybody shout out the name? Fort Liberty. Fort Liberty. Does that sound like a Christian nationalist megachurch or what? I understand of not naming army posts after Confederate generals, but Fort Liberty, could we have not done better than that? Oh my gosh. So my daughter's in second grade, and she comes home and she says, Dad, what is A? Starts with N, has two G's, and rhymes with jigger. And I said, well, where did you pick that up? And she said, there was a kid at school, and he said, I was one. That's an explicit bias. But when she was in sixth grade, we were living in Allegheny. And comes home from school, and I said, how was school? And she said, well, we're practicing for our Thanksgiving play, and I wanted to be a pilgrim, but they always make me an Indian. That's the implicit. You may have heard the term microaggression. Microaggression is sort of a recognition on someone's part that there's an implicit bias going on. One of the ones that I had experience with was that in believing that any tall African American male must be good at basketball. That used to drive the director of the Allegheny County Juvenile Detention Facility crazy because he was one and he was terrible at basketball. And that's an implicit bias. Here's a joke that contains an implicit and an explicit bias. And the joke is, what do you do when your cell phone gets wet? Anybody. Put it in rice. And why do you put it in rice? Absorbs the moisture. No, it's because the rice will attract an Asian and he'll fix your phone. Explicit bias is Asian. Anybody pick up the implicit bias? He will fix it. And he will fix it. Oh, fix it. When is a cell phone not a cell phone? Anybody, when is a cell phone not a cell phone? When it's held by an African American male, then it's a gun. There you go. Med schools are my med students. I try to teach medical students who were trying to teach them how to do history and physics. And I think it was William Osler. I was asking for people. Was it William Osler that said, listen to your patients, they're trying to tell you what they have. I have a little experience, and it was actually somebody else's experience. And back when I was in medical school, the board exams for internal medicine and pediatrics involved a written part and a practical. And so a friend of mine, Mike Arbuthnot, was taking his practical part, where he had to actually go in, interview a patient, do a physical, and come up with a differential diagnosis. And so he walked into the room and he extended the hand and he said, hello, my name is Mike Arbuthnot, and you are. And he said, I'm glad you asked me that. My name is Schwartz, but everybody keeps calling me Kleinfeld. For those of you who aren't physicians, Klinefelter is a disease of the adrenal gland. And he was right away. Thank you, Mr. Thank you. So, more localized thing is, how can you tell somebody went to Harvard? Anybody can answer this. How can you tell somebody went to Harvard? Don't you? Yes. And the Michigan variety is U of M. Met them in the first 15 minutes of conversation, or they will be wearing a necktie, or they'll have socks. They will tell you. How can you tell somebody's a racist? They'll tell you. They'll tell you they're not. They'll tell you they're not. How many times have you heard somebody say, I'm not a racist? But they'll tell you they're not. This implicit bias training was implemented in, of all places, one of the places in Texas. Of all places. And I remember this story because we talked about it, because it made the Wall Street Journal. There was this nurse, and she had worked for 32 years at this hospital, and she said, I am not racist. I do not need this training. I am not going to go to the training. And so they went through the legal maneuvers and everything like that. And she said, definitely am not a racist. I'm not taking the training. And she resigned from the hospital, giving up a 32-year supervising career. And my question is, how racist? Implicit biases are not common to the doctor-patient interaction, but they are kind of common. The first one I want to say is the affect heuristic. It's when a physician's actions are swayed by an emotional reaction not related to anything specific about the patient. It can be context specific or patient specific. Patient specific is when a patient's personality or behavior awakens a negative prior experience unrelated to the present situation. And I thought of patient's father that came in to our office, a pediatrician, and that he was asked to this form, give me a quick word, fill out the form, tell me about the son. And he got really belligerent about it. I don't need to do this. And, well, it helps us determine what's going on. So if you don't mind, bring it back to me. Fine. The medical assistant said, and he was shown to a room, and he sat in the room, and I was at the central station, and the door opened to the room, and he threw the clipboard out across the hall. So it's easy to blow this off as the guys are too, right? Cost, as we used to say. But it doesn't answer the question as to what is actually behind this. Sure, he set off an emotional reaction within me, but what did I not ask? I did not inquire as to what was going on with him. That's a patient specific affect heuristic. The tendency for us is not to explore the motivations of these actions, but to imply that they are due to whatever we think they're due to. And it's not that people will, there's a lot of anger in the world. And I have my own ideas about why that is, but we won't go into that. But it is true that in the Army, the Army mantra is don't tee off the mess sergeant or the medic. That was the thing. If you're going to get mad at somebody, don't get mad at the mess sergeant or the medic, but especially the mess sergeant, because you're going to get hungry more often than you get sick. Of course, race, age, and sex are the leading affect heuristics that affect the doctor-patient relationship. We've covered race, we have age. Sorry, we have sex. Did it really take us this long to figure out that when a woman has a heart attack, the symptoms are different from a heart attack in a male? But it took a long time. Is it really taking so long that in women who comprise more than half of our population, that nothing has done more to ameliorate menopause than whatever has been done so far, which is not a lot, but there have been some advances recently. Age. Children have the highest poverty level of all our population. Children have the highest poverty level in the United States. It's because we don't value children. We want to have babies, but but we don't do anything that supports our having babies. Pediatricians are one of the lowest income rates in the United States, and that's because they see children. And more of their percentage of patients on Medicaid, which doesn't cover the cost, than in any other specialty. IM, you get Medicare. Pediatrics, you get Medicaid, or even worse, people who don't qualify for Medicaid. Excuse me. And it is said that throughout our history, the reason why is because the average doctor was a middle-aged white male. Why would it have been like this? Lack of research into pain management. For a long time, children were not taught to experience or remember pain. We used to do circumcisions, no anesthesia whatsoever. And even when I was a medical student, I thought, this is not right. But I didn't challenge it because of authority bias. But I'll get to that. Episiotomies. How long has it been since we've been doing? When did we stop doing episiotomies?
I think the medically indicated was still doing it.
No, but we used to do it on every birth.
About 20 years ago.
20 years ago. 25. Totally unnecessary and barbaric. And yet I did it. Because that was what it was. Anchoring bias. A cognitive bias that causes us to over-rely on the first piece of information given. One of the smartest guys I ever had during my residency was a NICU specialist, a neonatologist. And before biases were defined as such, he came up with it's give them what you got. And the way he defined that was if you refer somebody to an ophthalmologist, they'll come back with glasses. If you refer somebody to an orthopedist, he'll come back, your patient will come back in a cast. And so that's how it got. And that is anchoring bias, is that you're substituting a pattern for a deductive reason. This is the result of the referring doctor over relying on the referring doctor's recommendation and substituting pattern recognition for collective reasoning. Closely related to confirmation bias, the tendency to process information consistent with existing beliefs and ignoring information that is inconsistent with those beliefs. In other words, it was thought that, or it is thought, that this exists on a person's inclination to preserve their self-esteem. That it is so hard to admit that you are wrong. You will carry this out to its illogical extreme. You can see this most often not in the field of medicine, but in the field of regular people. There are people who only watch CNN, and there are people who only watch Fox News. We do this to ourselves, and we are doing it to confirm our own biases. Confirmation bias in medicine. During the COVID epidemic, people working in the emergency room would see patient after patient with COVID. And so it was very typical that when they saw patients with flu-like symptoms, they were given the diagnosis of COVID when a small portion actually had something else. As a doctor, you gotta leave your ego at the door. If you don't, you're gonna make a big mistake. Attribution bias, the tendency to attribute characteristics of a person irrespective of their personal attributes. I'm sure that every physician in here can remember a time when they're at a party or something and somebody approaches them and they know you're a doctor and they ask you something that's completely off the wall to anything that you have any knowledge of. And that's attribution bias. They think you know everything about medicine. Another example of attribution bias is you think somebody with a lot of money must be a good person. We naturally think that. We know for a fact that's not true. Another one is my wife works for a copier sales company, and this is classic, um, and it's related to the Peter principle. Everybody know what the Peter principle is? Yes, of course they do. And that is if you're a good salesman, you must be a good sales manager. And many times that is far from the truth. Authority bias, we've already discussed to a small degree. So the other thing that I will mention will be the halo effect. And the halo effect is if somebody is really good looking, they must be a good person. And if somebody is not good looking, they must have some bad character. That's the halo effect. The American medical system, medical care system is not caring, it's not a system. And the best advice I can give you is don't get sick. Don't get sick. And it's amazing how few people really take it. Because the last thing you want to do in this country is get sick, especially with something complicated. So at this point, I think I will turn it over to the physicians in the room to make comments any way they choose. Yes, Bob Weaver. I wanted to share with you. He's a little too close.
I want to share with you that actually Harvard has a website. If you put down implicit bias test, there is a 5-minute test, and they actually, everyone who takes it, the results are added to the results of the test that shares with you what your implicit bias score is. Now, I can tell you how it works because there's no way that you can even game the test. You're shown two pictures and very rapidly to choose the one you like the most. And at the end of it, it shares with you what your implicit biases are. So I thought I would start there and tell everyone it's a fascinating test, takes 5 minutes, and it gives you an idea about implicit bias. And I share that with you because when I joined WMed and was asked to start a department, the first thing I was required to do was to take that test. The second thing that I was required to do before interviewing anyone was to take a course online on implicit bias. And as Dave pointed out, it is a requirement now in many states that implicit bias training be a part of continuing licensure. Now, I wanted to share, since Dave did, a story about my son. When we were in San Diego and our oldest child was beginning school, they had just introduced busing in San Diego. And for 9 weeks, he was bused to a different school. And the school was, we lived in the northern part of the city, near the university, and he was bused 45 minutes away to the southeast portion. and for 9 weeks out of 9 times 4, because there were 9-week quarters. And when he came home, we looked at him the first day and said, and he was in the first grade or second grade, and we said, was there anything different about attending this school? And he looked at us and said, no. And and we said, nothing at all. And he looked for a minute more and he said, well, he said, I did notice that most of the kids were chocolate colored. And that reminded me, when you made your story, Dave, that of the song from South Pacific.
Oh,
You've got to be taught, you've got to be carefully taught to hate everyone who your relatives hate. And clearly he had no such um, experiences and didn't know any better when he was in the first grade and taken to this other school for 9 weeks of the year. So I think that one of the questions I have going forward, and I'd like to see the medical school address as well as Western, is what's the future of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness in this country? Because just today I read that the University of Michigan, which of course was the victims, if you will, in some sense, losing $1 billion in their programs of developing DEI programs that were ruled out of bounds by the Supreme Court, has now removed everything from every application and from every interview and from every course that deals with diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. And the question is, going forward, except at the military academies, which, by the way, are allowed to continue to recruit on the basis of diversity for some reason, I don't know what that is. What is the future of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness in this country going forward? And how are we going to reduce even more our implicit biases?
they're inborn, so it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible. I will say, first of all, that my daughter didn't let her situation keep her from becoming the Pacific Islander in South Pacific for the Allegheny Community Players. She didn't let that interfere with that. Um, University of Michigan is a special case for sure because I think that their program was developed to address a racial problem, and the students of color found out that after a few years of this, they were actually worse off than they were before they started this DEI program. Uh, I read an article, a summary of a study, just a couple of weeks back, as to whether this implicit bias training works in a medical situation. And the answer is yes, it does for at least 4 weeks after you take the course. And the answer is, it doesn't go out because stereotypes are 80% correct.
Right.
And give that up for the occasional mandate that you might have to use deductive reasoning to parse out what's wrong with your patient. So put those together, and one can seriously question whether or not there's any reason for this to continue, or if there is there another way? Thank you. Anybody else? Michael?
Let's turn that off. Yeah, this one's off.
You can, thank you. There's only very much what the session.
Nicely done.
Yeah, really, really. And I'm going to say 100% agree with what you said. These,
With the microphone on.
implicit bias, I'm not talking explicit, I hope we don't have, nobody has explicit. Implicit has to do with a lot of your cultural, the way you were raised, the way your parents behaved, they taught you this level that we call what is good, what is bad, differentiation. This all has to do with your background. And then, of course, education helps quite a bit to get rid of it. As the more you become didactic, reasoning, especially if you learn quite good mathematics. That's my personal bias. You become questioning yourself whenever you say something. Think about it, you may be wrong. You said about listening to the patient is so true. 70% of diagnosis is made by what the patient is telling you. I mean, many physicians unfortunately don't listen. They don't have time. Not they don't want to listen, but there's too much loading on the physician. They don't have time, and most of them now become full employee of the corporation. So they lost that incentive that if I work harder, I make more money, I stay at home. That also is gone somewhat. So, in my opinion, this training business is not going to help. My grandson, who is medical student in Lansing, he said every week we have 1 or 2 hours just talking about this equity and the training business.
It's mandated.
Mandated. And so much time is lost discussing this thing when the medicine is exploding at every angle. So many things to learn, so many things, and then you want to spend so much time on this. So I'm going to support the rest of the people that, like, doctors comes out even doesn't know the very basic science that they're supposed to know. How can you come up with a diagnosis? That's one thing. The other thing I want to say, the bias is mutual. Patients also have bias. Yeah. Patients, many times I've heard from my own wife even said, "Oh, I'm not going to go to this doctor because the female are not good surgeons." Well, here, why you say that? I'm telling you, in fact, the female, in my opinion, from what I've studied, what I've read, they are much more meticulous when it comes to a small field. In my opinion, they are much better surgeons. But this is they're going to buy us.
There you are.
Yeah,
There you are.
I had,
There you are.
Bias.
I had a patient came to me one day. Listen to this story. He said, I'm just seeing him, giving him a consultation about that. Was about to go over our surgery. What is the intersection? He says, well, Dr. Kagani, can I ask you a question? I said, of course, I'm here to listen to you. Go tell me. He said, I want you to go to heaven. What I'm listening to. He said, I want you to become Christian so you can be saved. I said, I appreciate your concern. I really deeply appreciate it. But I have no plan to change whatever I believe I have. Has nothing to do with this. I'm going to offer you, and I will do my best. But I know a surgeon here in town that is Christian, and you should go to him because he didn't feel comfortable. I appreciate what he said. And I'm not saying this to say anything about that surgeon. Surgeon was a good surgeon, very good surgeon. Actually, otherwise I would have not recommended it. And that patient died on the table in the operating room.
There you are.
I'm so happy that it wasn't on my hand.
Exactly.
For me, suing me. Oh, this is the trouble. This is a tragedy. But this is universal, very common. We all do this. It's hardwired in our brain. Most of them is due to pattern recognition.
Exactly.
And this is the way we have the evolution has developed. I have to, the moment I see this looks like a snake, I'm going to run away. Oh, let me tell you to be a root. Or this looks like lion, I have to, otherwise I'm going to be chewed up by it. So this pattern recognition, which is hardwired in our brain for the past 5 million years, when we diverted from monkeys, is going to stay with us. And now, of course, the community and society is so diverse, especially US. I'm from Iran. That, oh, okay, then he is Muslim. No, 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 no. Or this guy is from Afghanistan, who is the terrorist. Immediately. This kind of stuff is ongoing constantly. This country has become so much divided because of this thing. Instead, somebody can look, see how good he is, how he performs, what is his results. Let's do some reasoning. This kind of stuff, okay. So I just raise these things to make sure that what you said absolutely is correct, and it's not going to go away. It's simply going to get worse. That's a fact.
There's this joke, and from my childhood, and it was the billboard that says Jesus saves, and underneath somebody writes Moses invests. But I have to say that for me, I found North Carolina to be a seeming inexhaustible cornucopia of biases. Is implicit, explicit, complicit, implicit. All of these biases just kept tumbling out. One time I was, we were sitting around talking at the Army Museum, and I was lamenting the fact that the Navy gets all the publicity with the NCIS and all these different programs and stuff like that. And Walter Reed, which is where I went, doesn't get it either. Now Walter is over into the fastest. And so I was saying to my colleague, why the difference? Why is everybody going with the fastest and they're not going to Walter Reed? And he said, it's because of the staffs. And I said, what's wrong with the Walter Reed staffs? And he pointed to his boot, which is black. And I said, it's because they wear boots. And he got up and walked. I like model railroad. I went to the model railroad club for my first time because there's a model railroad club in the area. And they have a general meeting before they get to work on the train. And so I got up and I introduced myself and sit down. And the guy next to me says, are you a Yankee? Oh, it's hard to deny that I'm a Yankee. I mean, I said, yeah. And he said, well, down here, we think of Yankees as hemorrhoids. Down and they go back up, it's okay. I come down and they stay down. I'm a pain in the ass. Well, I said, I'm staying down, baby. Anybody else?
Having spent 50 years in academia and some of this other business, I just think of an old reader. Your lesson from tonight is, to quote Reader's Digest from decades ago, laughter is the best medicine. Well, at any rate, sent the thought reform camp and being indoctrinated, I think cultural revolution in China, and we don't want that in our country. So somehow or another, we've got to learn to laugh, despite all the pain and the hurt of this, about these biases, and do our best, that they're part of, I think, human nature, I'm afraid. So a great presentation tonight, and you made us laugh a lot. I think is the answer.
I don't know what's going on. They're better than this. I'm fine.
Just wanted to let you know, New Jersey. First came to Michigan. That worked in the University of Michigan. Now I walked in with my New York Yankee cap, and they weren't too happy with me. But you know, we sort of got along. We went along. Biases sort of decreased a little bit. Now they're University of Michigan, so I decided, well, maybe I'd go to Notre Dame next, so that we could have some team togetherness. So at any rate, that was
So the thought was, at that point, well, why don't I just do the best I can with every patient that came in, and that all that other bias will just disappear. And it's so good. I wanted to say one more. During Thanksgiving, we got together with our family, we have a large family. Half of them are Republicans and half of them are Democrats. So we decided to get together and say, we're not going to talk about politics here. And when we got together, we had one of the best Thanksgivings. So sometimes you just have to let that bias go. Here you are. I have to apologize to my guest, Dwayne Cook, because at the very beginning of this, I was supposed to, well, I wanted to mention the White Coat Program for our medical students. And I predate white coats by a lot. And if you don't know what it is, and I suspect most of you don't, it is a ceremony in which the first year medical students are given their first white coats, and they have a reflex hammer in the pocket and a stethoscope, which they can use for the rest of their professional career if they ever go into the practice of medicine. Like not psychiatry or ophthalmology. Stethoscope sometimes. Susan and I both participate in the White Coat program. Gary, you do too? Okay. And you too. Good. So we would like to recruit people who are not physicians also to participate in this program. It is not that you don't have anything to offer, because you have a lot to offer. You're giving support to a medical student, you're giving support to a medical school. One of my senior M4 groups, my White Coat group, I usually sponsor 3 or 4 a year, and so I keep track of them with coffee every couple of months. Susan really gets into the lives of her White Coat students, and I cannot speak for how the rest of you go, but one of my students that I'm close to as an M4, her White Coat sponsor was somebody who was not related to the medical school at all. And the very first thing that he did to bond with her was, she was a non-traditional student and she has 3 children. He offered to babysit for her, and they kept in contact that way. So if you're not involved in medicine, you have something to offer. And so if you want to sponsor a first-year medical student who will carry you through until they graduate, I urge you to talk to Susan or myself or Dwayne, if you can find them.
Yeah, could I ask you?
Or Bob or Gary.
Susan.
Talk to us. White Coat sponsor or Susan.
To that, because let me tell you a little bit about the history of that. I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Arnold Gold and his wife, and years ago, he had the idea. He's had several ideas and several impacts. But the idea of the white coat ceremony was to encourage young people in training to have a higher approach to medicine and to look upon it as a calling and as a higher calling. And he offered each school a small sum of money to initially put on a white coat ceremony. He subsequently went on, and this is how I met him, to offer to societies in the United States, medical societies, to select a humanitarian to receive the Gold Award each year for something they've done in their specialty in a humanitarian basis. He subsequently went on to come up with the Gold Society for Medical Students that encourages those who have contributed to the community. For example, with those who are dealing with street medicine in Kalamazoo, to be selected by their peers to be members of the Gold Humanism Society. So that unfortunately he has passed away. Last time I looked, his wife was still running this organization, but he really has had a big impact. And he was a psychiatrist who practiced in New York for many years, and I believe he's on the faculty at Cornell. But he's had a big impact on bringing humanism to the concept of helping your fellow citizens.
They usually put together these lists around August or so, July and August, I think. You sign up, so get a hold of one of us. Okay, thank you.